When cognitive psychologists study mental overload in laboratory settings, they observe a consistent pattern. Participants can handle 3 or 4 complex mental tasks simultaneously, but the moment researchers add a fifth element, performance doesn't just decline, it collapses entirely. Brain imaging during these experiments reveals something striking. The prefrontal cortex, which coordinates complex thinking, shows signs of systematic breakdown rather than gradual decline. This isn't about having too many items on your schedule. This is about a specific neural system reaching its hard processing limit. And when that happens, your brain enters a state that neuroscientists are only beginning to understand. Hey there, neurospicy folks! I'm Dr. Monty, and I'm an ADHD psychologist with a special interest in all things neurodivergent neuroscience. If you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel to help me grow and bring more scientific understanding and awareness to a larger audience. Thanks so much! The conventional wisdom treats feeling overwhelmed as a logistical problem. Too many tasks competing for limited time. Most productivity advice assumes that better organization, clearer priorities, or more efficient scheduling will resolve the issue. Yet, research reveals a puzzling disconnect. People report feeling cognitively overwhelmed by task loads that, objectively, should be manageable. 3 emails, 2 phone calls, and a grocery run shouldn't impair cognitive function. Yet, controlled studies consistently show that subjective overwhelm can occur even when objective workload remains constant. The standard framework, while intuitive, overlooks a fundamental constraint. Neuroscience research indicates that the feeling of being overwhelmed stems from exceeding the processing capacity of working memory, the neural system responsible for holding and manipulating information in conscious awareness. When this system reaches its limit, the brain doesn't simply work more slowly. Instead, it shifts into a qualitatively different mode of operation, one that prioritizes threat detection over focused problem solving. This distinction matters because it suggests that traditional time management approaches address the wrong bottleneck. The constraint isn't in your external environment, it's in a specific cognitive architecture that has evolved limits on how much information it can process simultaneously. Understanding these limits changes both how we conceptualize overwhelm and how we might address it. Working memory represents one of the most studied yet still mysterious aspects of human cognition. Rather than functioning as simple storage, it operates as an active workspace where your brain maintains, manipulates, and coordinates multiple streams of information simultaneously. Alan Baddeley's influential model, developed through decades of research beginning in the 1970s, describes working memory as a central executive system that manages several subsystems, one for verbal information, another for visual spatial data, and a third that integrates information across time. The neural architecture underlying working memory involves distributed networks across the brain, with particularly heavy involvement from the prefrontal cortex. This region, located directly behind your forehead, coordinates activity across multiple brain areas and maintains the focused attention necessary for complex cognitive work. Neuroimaging studies show that working memory tasks produce sustained activation in prefrontal regions, along with synchronized activity in parietal and temporal areas. Working memory operates under severe capacity constraints. Early research suggested humans could maintain about 7 discrete items in conscious awareness, but this figure was based on simple recall tasks involving digits or letters. For complex cognitive operations, the kind required for decision-making, planning, and problem-solving, that capacity drops significantly. Current research indicates that working memory can effectively coordinate approximately 3 to 4 meaningful chunks of information during demanding cognitive tasks. Consider the neural mechanics of what happens when you exceed this limit. Each unresolved decision, each task you're mentally tracking, Each potential interruption you're monitoring requires active maintenance by prefrontal circuits. These circuits consume glucose at a disproportionately high rate compared to other brain regions. When demand exceeds capacity, several things happen simultaneously. Glucose depletion impairs prefrontal function. Stress response systems become activated, and the brain shifts from focused to diffuse attention modes. Amy Arnsten's research at Yale School of Medicine has documented the neurochemical cascade that occurs during cognitive overload. When working memory approaches its limits, the brain interprets this as a potential threat, triggering release of stress hormones, including cortisol and norepinephrine. These chemicals evolve to enhance survival during physical emergencies, situations requiring rapid motor responses rather than careful analysis. In the modern cognitive environment, they create a paradox. The brain's attempt to cope with mental overload actually impairs the precise cognitive functions needed to resolve that overload. The stress response creates measurable changes in brain connectivity. Under normal conditions, the prefrontal cortex maintains strong connections with other brain regions, allowing for coordinated, goal-directed thinking. During stress, these connections weaken, while connections between emotional centers like the amygdala and sensory processing areas strengthen. The result is a brain optimized for detecting threats and responding quickly, but poorly suited for the sustained, focused attention that complex problem-solving requires. This neurochemical shift explains the qualitative difference between regular stress and cognitive overwhelm. Stress about a specific challenge, a deadline, a difficult conversation, can actually enhance focus and performance within moderate ranges. But overwhelm produces a fragmented state where attention jumps rapidly between tasks without completing any of them. You might check the same email multiple times without processing its content, or open documents only to close them moments later without making progress. Daniel Levitin's research at McGill University has identified another crucial mechanism: decision fatigue. Each choice you make, even trivial ones like which task to tackle first, depletes glucose in the prefrontal cortex. Unlike other brain regions that can function on alternative fuel sources during glucose depletion, the prefrontal cortex shows rapid performance degradation when its primary energy source runs low. This creates a situation where the very act of trying to organize your thinking becomes another drain on the cognitive resources you need for that organization. The fragmentation of attention during overwhelm isn't random. It reflects an adaptive response that becomes maladaptive in modern environments. When working memory reaches capacity, the brain automatically shifts to what researchers term diffuse attention mode. Instead of maintaining focus on specific tasks, attention broadens to scan the environment for potential threats or opportunities. This was advantageous for our ancestors, who needed to monitor their surroundings while performing complex tasks like toolmaking or food preparation. In contemporary settings filled with notifications, competing deadlines, and multiple information streams, this same mechanism amplifies rather than reduces cognitive chaos. Individual differences in working memory capacity create substantial variation in how overwhelm manifests across different people. These differences aren't simply matters of practice or preference. They reflect underlying neurobiological variations that have significant practical implications. Adults with ADHD typically show working memory capacities approximately 1 standard deviation below neurotypical averages, according to Russell Barkley's extensive research at Virginia Commonwealth University. This means they reach cognitive overload with fewer simultaneous demands and experience overwhelm more frequently throughout the day. What appears as poor organization or lack of focus often reflects a brain operating closer to its processing limits under normal conditions. A counterintuitive finding complicates this picture. Some individuals with ADHD report improved focus and reduced overwhelm in high stimulation environments, busy coffee shops, chaotic offices, or situations with multiple concurrent projects. Russell Ramsey's preliminary research at the University of Pennsylvania suggests this might occur because external stimulation can help an underactive prefrontal cortex reach optimal arousal levels. The additional sensory input provides neurochemical activation that brings working memory systems into their effective operating range. Age introduces another layer of complexity. Working memory capacity begins declining in early adulthood and continues decreasing throughout the lifespan. Lynn Hasher's research at the University of Toronto has identified a specific mechanism. Older adults show reduced ability to inhibit irrelevant information, meaning their working memory workspace becomes cluttered with distracting thoughts. They face a double burden: smaller cognitive capacity combined with less effective filtering of competing information. Recent research has challenged some foundational assumptions about working memory limits. A 2019 meta-analysis by Klaus Obergauer at the University of Zurich suggests that capacity constraints may be more flexible than originally thought, varying significantly based on the type of information being processed and the strategies individuals use to organize that information. Some people appear capable of chunking information more efficiently, effectively expanding their functional working memory capacity through superior organizational strategies. The relationship between stress hormones and cognitive performance also proves more complex than initial research suggested. While elevated cortisol generally impairs working memory, Sonia Lupien's work at the University of Montreal demonstrates that the relationship follows an inverted U-shaped curve. Moderate stress levels can enhance cognitive performance, with impairment occurring only when cortisol levels spike too high or remain elevated for extended periods. This suggests an optimal arousal zone where you feel energized and focused rather than overwhelmed. Cultural factors may influence working memory strategies, though this research remains in early stages. Preliminary cross-cultural studies suggest that individuals from societies emphasizing parallel processing and multitasking, particularly some East Asian cultures, may develop different cognitive approaches that allow them to handle more simultaneous demands before experiencing overwhelm. However, the mechanisms underlying these differences remain unclear, and the research base is too limited for firm conclusions. We don't yet understand why some individuals show remarkable resilience to cognitive overload, while others become overwhelmed by relatively modest demands. Twin studies indicate genetic contributions to working memory capacity, but environmental factors including sleep quality, physical fitness, and meditation practice can significantly influence how that capacity is expressed. The interaction between genetic predisposition and environmental modification represents an active area of research with important practical implications. Understanding overwhelm as a working memory constraint rather than a time management problem fundamentally changes how you should approach cognitive overload. The objective isn't to process more information faster. It's to reduce the simultaneous demands on your prefrontal cortex so it can operate within its natural processing limits. The most effective intervention involves systematic cognitive offloading, transferring information from internal working memory to external systems. David Allen's Getting Things Done methodology works not because it provides superior organization, but because it systematically removes items from active mental tracking. When you externalize every task, commitment, and random thought, you free up cognitive bandwidth for actual analysis and decision-making rather than mere remembering. Effective cognitive offloading requires more than simple list making. Your brain continues tracking items unless it trusts that your external system will provide reliable reminders when needed. This explains why basic to-do lists often fail. They lack the contextual information about when and where you'll address each item that your working memory needs to safely release those items from active monitoring. Single tasking becomes essential once you understand the underlying mechanism. Each additional task you attempt to maintain in working memory creates exponential rather than linear increases in cognitive load. Clifford Nass's research at Stanford University demonstrated that chronic multitaskers actually develop reduced ability to filter irrelevant information, creating a persistent state of distractibility that impairs performance even during focused work periods. The presence of potential interruptions creates measurable cognitive costs, even when those interruptions don't occur. Adrian Ward's 2017 study at the University of Texas found that smartphones reduce available cognitive capacity even when they're turned face down and silenced. Your working memory allocates resources to monitor for potential interruptions, creating a constant background drain on cognitive resources. Effective overwhelm management requires physically removing potential distractions from your environment, not just ignoring them. Sleep quality becomes critical because working memory shows particular vulnerability to sleep deprivation. Matthew Walker's research at UC Berkeley indicates that even single nights of poor sleep can reduce working memory capacity by up to 40%. This creates a destructive cycle. Cognitive overload leads to extended work hours and delayed sleep, which further impairs the cognitive capacity needed to manage complex demands effectively. Physical exercise provides cognitive benefits that extend beyond general stress reduction. John Rady's research at Harvard Medical School shows that aerobic exercise specifically increases production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports the neural connections underlying working memory function. Even brief exercise sessions can provide temporary boosts in cognitive capacity. Mindfulness meditation directly trains the attention regulation systems that working memory depends on. Sarah Lazar's neuroimaging studies at Massachusetts General Hospital demonstrate that 8 weeks of regular mindfulness practice produces measurable increases in gray matter density within prefrontal regions. You're strengthening the neural architecture that manages cognitive load. Learning to recognize early signs of approaching cognitive overload may be the most practical skill you can develop. The warning signals are often subtle: repetitive checking of the same information, low-level anxiety without clear cause, or avoidance of tasks that normally wouldn't create difficulty. These indicate that your working memory is approaching capacity limits. The appropriate response isn't increased effort. It's systematic reduction of cognitive load through offloading, environmental modification, or temporary disengagement to allow recovery. Cognitive overwhelm occurs when working memory, your brain system for coordinating complex thinking, reaches its processing capacity of approximately 3 to 4 simultaneous demands. When this limit is exceeded, the prefrontal cortex doesn't simply work more slowly. It shifts into a qualitatively different operating mode, optimized for threat detection rather than focused problem solving. Stress hormones released during this transition further impair the cognitive functions needed to resolve the overload, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. The solution involves respecting these neurobiological constraints rather than attempting to override them through willpower or better scheduling. Systematic cognitive offloading, environmental modification to reduce distractions, and recognition of early overload signals allow you to work within your brain's architecture rather than against it. Understanding overwhelm as a biological limit rather than a personal failure transforms both how you interpret these experiences and how you can most effectively address them.